The morning air bit cold against Yates Oakes's skin as he stepped out of his house and walked toward the stable, his breath forming small clouds in the November darkness that was just beginning to surrender to the first hints of dawn. He had risen early as always, needing to tend to his horses before heading into Lead to pick up supplies for the coming winter. The year was 1881, and South Dakota winters showed no mercy to those unprepared. His boots crunched against the frost-covered ground, the sound echoing in the stillness that blanketed his small ranch on the outskirts of town. He pushed open the stable door, expecting to find his 3 horses standing peacefully in their stalls, but instead he froze, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior until they landed on something that made his heart skip. A young woman lay curled in the corner of his stable, her dark hair spread across the hay, her clothes torn and dusty, her face pale in the weak light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. She was asleep, her body trembling slightly despite being unconscious, and Yates could see the exhaustion written in every line of her face. His first instinct was to wake her, to demand what she was doing on his property, but something stopped him. The vulnerability in her sleeping form, the way her fingers clutched at nothing as if seeking warmth, the dried mud on her boots that suggested she had traveled far. Instead of disturbing her, Yates turned and walked quietly back to the house, his mind racing with questions but his heart telling him to offer kindness before interrogation. He grabbed the thick wool blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed, one his mother had made years before she passed, and returned to the stable with careful steps. The woman had not stirred. Yates approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her if she woke, and gently draped the blanket over her thin frame. She shifted slightly at the warmth, a small sigh escaping her lips, but her eyes remained closed. Yates stood there for a moment, studying her face in the growing light. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, close to his own 26 years. There was something refined about her features despite the dirt and exhaustion, something that suggested she had not always lived rough. He moved away to tend his horses, keeping his movements quiet, feeding them and checking their water while his mind worked through the situation. She was obviously running from something or someone. Women did not end up sleeping in strangers' stables by choice, not in this part of the country. Lead was a mining town, rough around the edges, filled with men seeking gold and fortune. It was no place for a woman alone, especially not one who looked like she had been traveling hard. When he finished with the horses, he glanced back at the corner where she slept. The blanket had stopped her shivering, and she seemed to be resting more peacefully now. Yates decided to return to the house and prepare breakfast. If she woke and found him hovering, she would likely bolt like a frightened deer. Better to give her space and time to wake naturally. He cooked eggs and bacon, made coffee strong enough to chase away the morning chill, and set out 2 plates on his small kitchen table. The sun was fully up now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and he figured she would wake soon. He was right. About 20 minutes later, he heard movement from the stable, the sound of hay rustling, followed by a long silence that he imagined was her trying to figure out where she was and how she had gotten a blanket. He waited, sipping his coffee, giving her time to compose herself. Finally, he heard tentative footsteps approaching the house. Through the window, he watched her emerge from the stable, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the area cautiously. She looked like she was debating whether to run or approach the house. Yates stood and walked to the door, opening it before she could make that decision. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice gentle, his hands visible so she could see he held no weapon. "I made breakfast if you are hungry." She stared at him, her green eyes wide and wary, her body tense to flee. Up close, he could see the scratches on her hands, the bruise forming on her cheek, the way she held herself as if every muscle ached. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I am sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I did not mean to trespass. I was just so tired, and I saw the stable, and I thought I could rest for a few hours before moving on." "You are not in trouble," Yates said, "but you look like you could use a hot meal and maybe some answers to questions you probably have. Come inside. It is too cold to talk out here." She hesitated, studying his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was close enough that he could step aside and let her enter. She moved past him carefully, keeping distance between them, her eyes darting around the small house as if cataloging escape routes. "Sit," Yates said, gesturing to the table. "The food is still warm." She lowered herself into the chair slowly, as if her body protested the movement, and he set a plate in front of her. She looked at it like she had not seen food in days, which she probably had not. He sat across from her and began eating his own breakfast, not staring at her, giving her privacy to eat without feeling scrutinized. She picked up the fork and started eating slowly at first, then faster, her hunger overcoming her caution. They ate in silence for several minutes before Yates spoke. "I am Yates Oakes. This is my ranch, small as it is. I raise horses mostly, sell them to folks who need reliable mounts." She finished chewing and swallowed before responding. "Hannah Jennings," she said quietly, "thank you for the blanket and for this." She gestured to the plate. "You are welcome," Yates said. "You want to tell me what brought you to my stable in the middle of the night?" Hannah set down her fork and looked at her hands, her jaw tightening. "I am running away from someone. My stepfather. He wanted to marry me off to a man in Deadwood, a friend of his who is nearly 50 years old. I refused, and when he tried to force me, I left. I took what little money I had saved and bought passage on a stagecoach heading west, but it was robbed 2 days ago. The bandits took everything, including the horses. I have been walking since then, trying to reach Lead because I heard there might be work here." Yates leaned back in his chair, processing her words. "You walked for 2 days?" "Yes," she said. "I stayed off the main road mostly, afraid the bandits might come back or that my stepfather might have sent someone after me. I ate what I could find, slept when I could not walk anymore. Last night I saw your ranch and I just could not go any further. I am sorry." "Stop apologizing," Yates said. "You did what you had to do, but Lead is not exactly welcoming to women on their own. What kind of work were you hoping to find?" Hannah lifted her chin, and he saw pride flash in her eyes. "I can cook, clean, so I worked in my stepfather's boarding house for years after my mother died. I thought maybe someone might need help with laundry or mending, or maybe one of the boarding houses would hire me." Yates considered this. Lead was indeed full of boarding houses that catered to minors, and they always needed help. But they also attracted trouble, and a young woman like Hannah would be prey for rough men with no manners and too much drink in them. The thought of her working in one of those places, vulnerable and alone, bothered him more than it should have, given that he had only just met her. "I might have another option," he said carefully. "I have been needing help around here. The house is not much to look at, and I am terrible at cooking anything beyond the basics. The stable needs proper cleaning, and my clothes could use mending. If you want, you could stay here and work for me. I would pay you fair wages, and you would have a safe place to sleep. There is a small room off the kitchen that is not being used. It is not fancy, but it is private and warm." Hannah stared at him, suspicion and hope warring in her expression. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "No," Yates agreed. "But I know what it is like to be alone and desperate. When I was 18, I left home because my father drank away everything we had. I worked odd jobs, slept in barns, went hungry more nights than I care to remember. Someone took a chance on me eventually, gave me work when I needed it most. I figure I can do the same for someone else. She searched his face for a long moment, and he let her look, having nothing to hide. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, but I will earn my keep. I do not want charity. It would not be charity, Yates said. I need the help and you need work. That is a fair trade. They finished breakfast, and afterward Yates showed her the small room he had mentioned. It was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and single dresser it contained, but it had a window that let in sunlight and a door that could be locked from the inside. Hannah ran her hand over the quilt on the bed, and he saw her eyes grow damp. It is perfect, she said softly. Thank you. Get some rest, Yates said. You look like you need it. We can talk about what needs doing later. Hannah nodded, and he left her alone, closing the door behind him. He returned to his morning chores, but his mind kept drifting back to the young woman now sleeping in his house. There was something about her that drew him, something beyond her obvious beauty. Perhaps it was the strength he saw in her despite her exhaustion, or the way she held her head high even when she was clearly frightened. Whatever it was, Yates found himself glad she had stumbled onto his property. Hannah slept through most of the day, waking only when the sun was beginning to set. She emerged from the small room looking more rested but also self-conscious, smoothing down her wrinkled dress and pushing her hair back from her face. Yates was sitting at the table, working on mending a bridle, and he looked up when she appeared. Feel better? He asked. Much, she said. I cannot remember the last time I slept in a real bed. I should get started on those chores you mentioned. Tomorrow is soon enough, Yates said. Tonight, you can help me with supper if you want, or you can rest more. Your choice. Hannah moved toward the kitchen area, examining the supplies he had. If you have flour and whatever else, I can make biscuits to go with whatever you were planning. I was planning on more eggs, Yates admitted. I am not much of a cook. Hannah laughed, a sound that transformed her tired face into something radiant. Then it is a good thing you hired me. Let me see what I can do. She set to work, and Yates continued with his bridle, occasionally glancing up to watch her move around the kitchen with practiced ease. She found what she needed, mixing and kneading dough, humming softly to herself. By the time she had biscuits baking, she had also managed to create a soup from the vegetables she found and some dried beef. The smell filled the small house, making it feel more like a home than it had in years. They ate together, and the conversation came easier this time. Hannah asked about the horses, and Yates told her about each one, their personalities and quirks. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about her mother who had died 3 years ago from fever, about her stepfather who had changed after the death, becoming bitter and controlling. He never liked that I had opinions, Hannah said, her fingers tracing the rim of her bowl. He thought women should be silent and obedient. When I refused to marry his friend, he said I was ungrateful and selfish. Maybe I am selfish, but I could not do it. I could not marry a man I did not love just because it would benefit my stepfather financially. That is not selfish, Yates said firmly. That is smart. Marriage should be between two people who choose each other, not a business arrangement forced on someone. Hannah looked at him with surprise, as if she had not expected such a response. Not many men think that way. Then not many men are worth much, Yates said. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Hannah proved to be as capable as she had claimed, and within a week the house was cleaner than it had ever been. His clothes were all mended, and he was eating better than he had since his mother passed. More than that, though, he found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together after the work was done. talking about everything and nothing. Hannah was intelligent and curious, asking him about ranching and horses and the Black Hills. He told her about Lead, about the gold rush that had brought so many people to the area, about the uneasy relationship between the miners and the Lakota people whose land had been taken. "It is not right," Hannah said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "The way they were forced from their land. My stepfather used to say it was progress, but it always seemed more like theft to me." Yates nodded, appreciating that she saw the injustice. "It is theft. The treaties were broken before the ink dried, but folks only see the gold, not the cost." As November turned to December, the cold deepened and snow began to fall with regularity. Yates taught Hannah how to handle the horses, showing her how to approach them calmly, how to read their moods, how to saddle and bridle them properly. She learned quickly, her fear giving way to confidence. She particularly bonded with his gentlest mare, a gray named Silver who seemed to sense Hannah's nervous energy and remained patient with her. Yates found himself noticing things about Hannah that had nothing to do with her work. The way she smiled when she was amused by something, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly before the full smile emerged. The way she sang quietly while she cooked, songs he did not recognize, but that made the house feel warm. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on mending something particularly tricky. He tried to push these observations away, telling himself that Hannah was his employee, that she was vulnerable and under his protection, that it would be wrong to develop feelings for her. But the heart did not always listen to reason. Hannah was having similar struggles. She had been drawn to Yates from the beginning, grateful for his kindness, but also aware of his quiet strength, his gentle manner with the horses, the way he treated her with respect. He never stood too close, never made her feel uncomfortable, always knocked before entering a room even though it was his house. He made her laugh with dry observations about the people who came to buy horses, and he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. She had never known a man like him. Her stepfather had been controlling and dismissive. The men who had courted her in Kansas had been interested only in her appearance or what she could bring to a marriage. But Yates seemed interested in her thoughts, her opinions, her dreams. When she mentioned one evening that she had always wanted to learn to read better, having only basic schooling, he immediately offered to help her, pulling out books from the small shelf in the corner and spending an hour each night teaching her. It was during one of these evening reading lessons that something shifted between them. They were sitting close together at the table, Yates pointing to words in a book about the history of the frontier, when Hannah struggled with a particularly long word. She sounded it out slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration, and when she finally got it right, she looked up with triumph only to find Yates staring at her with an expression that made her breath catch. He looked away quickly, clearing his throat. "You are doing well," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You learn fast." Hannah could feel her heart pounding. "I have a good teacher." The moment passed, but something had changed, an awareness now humming between them that had not been acknowledged before. They were both more careful after that, maintaining proper distance, but the attraction was undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. In mid-December, a man came to the ranch looking to buy a horse. He was a miner from Lead, rough-mannered and loud, and when Hannah brought out coffee for them while they talked, he looked her up and down in a way that made Yates's jaw tighten. "She yours?" the miner asked bluntly. "She works for me," Yates said, his voice cold. "And you will speak respectfully or you can leave," the miner laughed. "Touchy, are you? Did not mean nothing by it. Just surprised to see a woman like that out here. She could make good money in town if you know what I mean." Yates stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "Get off my property." Now, the miner's smile faded. "I was just making conversation." "I do not care. Leave." The man left, grumbling, and Yates stood on the porch watching until he was out of sight. When he turned, he found Hannah standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to cause trouble." "You did not cause anything," Yates said, his anger still evident. "He was disrespectful, and I will not have that here." Hannah stepped closer. "You defended me." "Of course I did," Yates said, looking at her with confusion. "Did you think I would not?" "Most men would not have," Hannah said softly. "They would have laughed along with him or ignored it." Yates moved closer, stopping just before reaching her, his hands clenched at his sides as if fighting the urge to touch her. "I am not most men, Hannah. And you are not just someone who works for me. You are—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I am what?" Hannah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You are important to me," Yates said finally, the words seeming to cost him something. "More important than you should be after only a month. I know it is not proper for me to say so, and I will understand if you want to leave, but I cannot pretend any more that I do not feel something for you." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. "I do not want to leave," she said. "I feel the same way. I have been trying not to because I thought you were just being kind, that you saw me as someone to help." But she did not finish the sentence because Yates closed the distance between them and cupped her face gently in his hands. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Hannah breathed. He kissed her softly at first, tentative, as if afraid she might pull away. But Hannah leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and the kiss deepened, becoming something that spoke of all the longing and connection they had been denying. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads resting together. "I did not plan this," Yates said. "I did not expect to fall in love with you." "I did not expect it either," Hannah said, smiling through her tears. "But I am glad it happened." They stood there holding each other as snow began to fall outside, soft flakes drifting past the window. Everything had changed in that moment, and both of them knew there was no going back. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a cowboy covering a sleeping stranger with a blanket, had transformed into something neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest either of them had ever known. They continued with the ranch work, but now there were stolen kisses in the stable, hands held while sitting by the fire, whispered conversations late into the night. Yates courted Hannah properly despite them living under the same roof, bringing her small gifts when he went into lead for supplies, wild flowers he found during his rides, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Hannah bloomed under his affection, her confidence growing, the shadows of fear and exhaustion that had haunted her face when she arrived fading completely. She laughed more, sang louder, and looked at Yates with such open love that it made his heart ache with the beauty of it. But their happiness was threatened just after Christmas when a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was well dressed, riding a fine horse, and when he dismounted, he looked at the house with disgust. "I am looking for Hannah Jennings," he called out. "I was told she might be here." Yates emerged from the stable, immediately on guard. "Who is asking?" "My name is Robert Jennings. I am her stepfather. She ran away from home, and I have come to bring her back." Hannah appeared in the doorway of the house, her face going pale. "I am not going back," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You are my responsibility until you marry," Robert said coldly. "You will return with me, or I will have the law involved. You are a thief. You took money that did not belong to you when you left." "That money was from my mother," Hannah said, anger replacing her fear. "She left it to me, not to you." Your mother left everything to me when she died, Robert countered. Including you and everything you own. Now come along. We can discuss your punishment on the way back. She is not going anywhere with you, Yates said, stepping forward to place himself between Hannah and her stepfather. She is an adult, and she has the right to choose where she lives. Robert laughed harshly. And who are you to tell me what I can do with my stepdaughter, her employer? How much is she paying you for protection? Or is she earning her keep in other ways? Yates moved fast, grabbing Robert by the collar and pulling him close. You will not speak about her that way. Get back on your horse and leave. If you try to take her, you will regret it. Robert sneered. I could have you arrested for threatening me. Try it, Yates said. But you will have to explain to the law why you tracked a grown woman across multiple territories just to force her into an unwanted marriage. I am guessing the law might have questions about that. Robert jerked away from Yates's grip, his face red with anger. He looked past Yates to Hannah. This is not over. You belong to me until you are married, and I will see that arrangement fulfilled one way or another. He mounted his horse and rode away, but not before casting a look back that promised he would return. Yates watched him go, then turned to Hannah, who was shaking. He will not give up, she said. He is too stubborn, and he has too much to gain from selling me off to his friend. Then we will have to make sure he has no legal ground to stand on, Yates said. He took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. Marry me, Hannah. Not because of your stepfather, though that would solve the immediate problem. Marry me because I love you, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it, because you make every day better just by being here. Hannah stared at him, tears streaming down her face. You want to marry me? I want nothing more, Yates said. I know it has only been a few months and maybe it is too fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Hannah Jennings. Will you marry me? Yes, Hannah said, laughing through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. They rode into Lead the next morning and found the minister who served the small church in town. He was an older man with kind eyes who listened to their story and agreed to marry them immediately. There were no fancy clothes or elaborate ceremony, just Yates and Hannah standing before the minister in the small church, speaking vows to love and cherish each other for all their days. 2 townspeople served as witnesses, a merchant and his wife who seemed delighted to be part of the proceedings. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Hannah with such tenderness that the merchant's wife wiped tears from her eyes. They signed the marriage certificate, making everything legal and binding, and then rode back to the ranch as husband and wife. That night, they consummated their marriage in Yates's bedroom, which was now their bedroom. Yates was gentle and patient, making sure Hannah felt safe and loved. She had been nervous, having limited knowledge of what to expect, but Yates took his time, kissing her slowly, telling her she was beautiful, showing her with actions and words how much she meant to him. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness, of 2 people who belonged to each other completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Hannah's head on Yates's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. I never thought I could be this happy, Hannah whispered. When I ran away from my stepfather, I thought my life was over. I thought I would end up working myself to death in some boarding house or worse. But then I found your stable, and you covered me with a blanket, and everything changed. I found you, Yates corrected gently. And I am grateful for every moment that led you to me, even the hard ones, because they brought you here. Hannah lifted her head to look at him. Do you think my stepfather will come back? Probably, Yates said honestly, but you are my wife now. He has no claim on you, and I will protect you with everything I have. Hannah kissed him softly. I know you will. I trust you completely. Robert Jennings did return just over a week later, but this time he brought a marshal with him. Yates and Hannah met them outside the house, standing together, united. Robert looked triumphant as the marshal dismounted. "That is her," Robert said, pointing at Hannah. "She is a thief and a runaway. I want her arrested and returned to my custody." The marshal, a weary-looking man in his 40s, looked at Hannah. "Miss Jennings, Mrs. Oakes," Hannah corrected, lifting her chin. "I married Yates Oakes just over a week ago. I am no longer under my stepfather's authority." Robert's face went purple with rage. "She cannot do that." "She is still my responsibility." "Actually, she can," the marshal said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "I took the liberty of checking into this situation before riding out here. Mrs. Oakes is of legal age, which means she had every right to leave your home and every right to marry without your permission. As for the theft accusation, do you have proof that the money she took belonged to you and not to her?" "It was household money," Robert blustered. "She had no right to take it. But you cannot prove it was not money her mother left to her, which she claims it was," the marshal said. "Without proof, I cannot arrest her for theft. And since she is now married, she is under her husband's authority, not yours." "I am sorry, Mr. Jennings, but there is nothing I can do here." Robert looked from the marshal to Hannah to Yates, his face contorting with anger. "You will regret this," he said to Hannah. "You threw away a good marriage to a wealthy man to live in poverty with this nobody. When you come crawling back, I will not help you." "I will never come back," Hannah said clearly. "I would rather have love and poverty than wealth and misery. I am sorry you cannot understand that." Robert spat on the ground at their feet and mounted his horse, riding away without another word. The marshal tipped his hat to them. "I hope you too will be happy," he said. "Not many people have the courage to choose their own path like you did, Mrs. Oakes." After he left, Hannah sagged against Yates, relief making her weak. "It is really over," she said. "He cannot force me back." "It is over," Yates confirmed, holding her tight. "You are mine now and I am yours, and nothing will change that." Winter deepened, and the ranch became a world unto itself, isolated by snow and cold but warm within. Yates and Hannah settled into married life with an ease that suggested they had been together for years rather than months. They worked together during the day, caring for the horses and maintaining the property, and spent the evenings reading, talking, and making love. Yates taught Hannah everything he knew about horses and ranching, and she proved to be an excellent student, her natural affinity for the animals growing stronger. In February, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses and was experiencing morning sickness that left her pale and shaky. When she told Yates, he looked at her with such wonder and joy that she cried. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice awed. "Yes," Hannah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Sometime in early autumn, I think." Yates picked her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully as if suddenly afraid he might hurt her. "I am going to be a father," he said, the words seeming to sink in. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Hannah asked, suddenly nervous that it might be too soon. "Happy?" Yates cupped her face in his hands. "I am beyond happy. I am terrified and excited and grateful and 100 other things, but most of all I am happy. You have given me everything, Hannah. A home that feels like a home. Love that I never thought I would find, and now a child. How could I be anything but happy?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as spring arrived and the snow melted, Hannah bloomed along with the landscape. Her belly grew round, and Yates treated her like precious glass, constantly worried that she was doing too much. Hannah found his protectiveness endearing but also slightly frustrating, having to constantly reassure him that she was fine and that pregnant women had been doing chores since the beginning of time. "I am not sick," she told him one afternoon when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her. "I am just pregnant. I can still work." "But you should not have to," Yates argued. "You should rest and take care of yourself and the baby." "I will rest when I am tired," Hannah said, kissing his cheek. "But I will go mad if you make me sit around all day doing nothing. Let me help. It makes me feel useful." They compromised, with Hannah doing lighter chores and Yates handling anything that required heavy lifting or strenuous effort. As summer arrived, they prepared for the baby's arrival, transforming the small room Hannah had first slept in into a nursery. Yates built a cradle from wood he had been saving, carving it with care and sanding it, until it was smooth enough that Hannah could run her hand over it without fear of splinters. Hannah sewed tiny clothes, blankets, and quilts, her heart full as she imagined holding their child. They talked about names during the long evenings, arguing playfully over options. Yates wanted strong traditional names, while Hannah favored more unusual choices. They eventually agreed that they would wait until the baby was born to decide, wanting to see who their child was before naming them. In late September, as the leaves were beginning to turn and the air carried the first hints of autumn chill, Hannah went into labor. Yates rode into Lead to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Thompson, who had delivered most of the babies in the area. She arrived quickly, took one look at Hannah, and got to work preparing the bedroom. "You should wait outside," Mrs. Thompson told Yates. "I am staying," Yates said firmly, taking Hannah's hand, "unless Hannah wants me to go." "Stay," Hannah gasped, gripping his hand hard as another contraction hit. "Please stay." Mrs. Thompson shrugged. "It is your choice, but most men cannot handle it." Yates stayed, holding Hannah's hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement even as he felt helpless in the face of her pain. Labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Yates feared they would lose both Hannah and the baby, moments when Hannah screamed with pain and he could do nothing but hold her and pray. But finally, as the sun reached its zenith, the baby was born. "It is a girl, Mrs. Thompson announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby girl." Yates looked at his daughter, covered in blood and vernix but perfect in every way, and felt something shift inside him. When Mrs. Thompson placed the cleaned and swaddled baby in Hannah's arms, he sat on the bed beside his wife and stared at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "She is perfect," Hannah agreed, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "What should we name her?" They looked at their daughter, this tiny person who was half Hannah and half Yates, and the name came to them simultaneously. "Grace," they said together, then laughed. "Grace Oakes," Yates said, testing the name. "I like it." "So do I," Hannah said. "Grace, because she is a gift we did not know we needed." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Grace was a good baby, healthy and alert, but she still required constant care. Yates and Hannah took turns walking her when she cried at night, changing her, feeding her. Yates proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle, singing to Grace in a soft voice that always seemed to calm her. Hannah watched him with their daughter and fell even more in love with him, if that was possible. They managed the ranch together, with Grace often strapped to Hannah's back in a sling or sleeping in a basket nearby while they worked. The horses seemed to sense they needed to be careful around the baby, staying calm when Grace was near. Silver in particular seemed fascinated by the infant, often stretching her neck over the stall door to sniff at Grace when Hannah brought her into the stable. As Grace grew, she became the center of their world. Her first smile, her first laugh, her first word, which was "da" much to Yates's delight and Hannah's mock indignation. They celebrated each milestone, no matter how small, grateful for the life they had built together. When Grace was a year old, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was not surprised, and neither was Yates. They had talked about wanting more children, wanting Grace to have siblings like neither of them had. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Hannah knew what to expect, and in July of 1883 she gave birth to a son. They named him William, after Yates's father, who had died when Yates was young. William was different from Grace, more fussy and demanding, but Yates loved him just as fiercely. Watching Yates with both children, seeing how patient he was with William's cries and how he played gently with Grace, made Hannah grateful every day for the choice she had made to run away from her stepfather. If she had not, she would have missed all of this beautiful, chaotic, perfect life. The ranch prospered as well. Yates's reputation for breeding quality horses grew, and buyers came from as far as Wyoming and Nebraska to purchase his stock. He hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavier work, allowing him more time with his growing family. Hannah managed the household and helped with the business side of things, proving to have a good head for numbers and negotiations. By the time Grace was 5 and William was 3, the small ranch had grown into a successful operation. They had expanded the stable, added more land, and increased their herd of horses. Yates and Hannah talked about building a larger house, one with more bedrooms and a proper kitchen, but they kept putting it off, both of them sentimentally attached to the small house where their love had grown. One evening in November of 1886, 5 years after Hannah had first fallen asleep in Yates's stable, they sat on the porch together watching Grace and William play in the yard. Grace was teaching William how to skip, both of them laughing when he kept tripping over his own feet. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Hannah asked, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "If I had not stopped at your ranch that night, if I had kept walking or chosen a different stable—" "I try not to," Yates admitted. "It scares me to think about how easily I could have missed you. If I had gone to the stable an hour later, you might have woken and left before I found you. If I had been less kind or more suspicious, I might have sent you away. We were lucky, Hannah. Lucky that everything aligned the way it did." "It was not just luck," Hannah said. "You chose to be kind. You chose to help a stranger. You could have woken me and sent me away, but instead you covered me with a blanket. That choice changed everything." Yates pulled her closer. "Best choice I ever made, even if I did not know it at the time." "I love you," Hannah said, the words as natural as breathing after 5 years together. "I loved you then, when I woke and found that blanket and realized someone had cared enough to make sure I was warm. I loved you when you offered me breakfast instead of judgment. I loved you when you defended me to that miner. I loved you when you proposed. I loved you when Grace was born and you cried because you were so happy. I love you now, watching you with our children. I will love you for the rest of my life." Yates turned to kiss her, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 5 years of partnership and love and trust. "And I will love you for the rest of mine," he said. "You gave me a reason to want more from life than just getting through each day. You gave me a family, a home, a future worth building. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, the sun setting behind the black hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Inside the house, the blanket Yates had covered Hannah with that first morning was folded on their bed, a silent reminder of where it all began. It was worn now, frayed at the edges, but neither of them could bring themselves to get rid of it. It represented the beginning of their story, the moment when a simple act of kindness had set them both on a path neither had expected but both were grateful for. As the years continued to pass, Their family grew and their love deepened. They had 2 more children, another girl and another boy, and watched as all 4 grew into strong, kind individuals who knew they were loved. Grace grew up to be an excellent horsewoman, helping Yates with the ranch until she married a kind man from Lead and started her own family. William became a veterinarian, his childhood spent around horses sparking a lifelong passion for helping animals. The younger 2 children also found their own paths, both staying close to the family ranch. Yates and Hannah aged together, their hair graying, their faces lining, but their love never diminishing. They continued to work the ranch together even as they grew older, unable to imagine retiring from the life they had built. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration, inviting everyone from Lead and the surrounding ranches. It was a grand party, with food and music and dancing, and Yates and Hannah stood in the center of it all, surrounded by the life they had created. "Do you remember the day we met?" Hannah asked as they danced slowly to a fiddle tune. "Every detail," Yates said. "You were curled up in the corner of my stable, shivering even in sleep. I went and got my mother's blanket, the one she made before she died. I covered you with it because I could not stand to see you cold. When I walked away, I had no idea that my life was about to change completely." "Mine too," Hannah said. "I was so scared that morning, so exhausted and hopeless. But when I woke up and felt that blanket, felt that someone had cared enough to make sure I was warm, I started to hope again. And then I met you, and you were so kind, and you did not judge me or send me away. You gave me work and safety and eventually your heart. You saved me, Yates." "We saved each other," Yates corrected. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions of life without really living. You taught me what it meant to love someone completely, to build a life with someone instead of just surviving alone. Every good thing in my life came from the decision to cover you with that blanket, to invite you inside, to open my heart to you." They danced until the music stopped, then stood holding each other as their children and grandchildren watched with tears in their eyes. It was a moment of perfect happiness, a culmination of 25 years of love and partnership and dedication to each other. Hannah and Yates lived into their 70s, never spending more than a day apart. When Yates finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, Hannah was beside him, holding his hand. She grieved deeply but not with regret. They had lived a full life together, had loved each other every single day, had built something beautiful from a chance encounter in a stable at dawn. Hannah lived for 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about how they had met, about the blanket that had started everything. When she passed away in her sleep one autumn night, the family found her with a smile on her face, the old wool blanket pulled up around her shoulders. They buried her next to Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, and at the funeral, Grace told the story one more time for the youngest grandchildren who had not heard it yet. The story of how a cowboy found a woman asleep in his stable at dawn and chose kindness over suspicion. The story of how he fetched a blanket before she could wake, a simple gesture that had led to a lifetime of love. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, and the story became legend. Children were told about their great-great-grandparents, about how their love story began with a blanket and grew into something that lasted beyond death. The blanket itself was preserved, kept in a special box, taken out only for weddings and special occasions, a tangible reminder that small acts of kindness could change everything. And on cold autumn mornings, when the dawn light filtered through the stable the same way it had that morning so many years ago, family members swore they could sometimes see 2 figures standing there together, a man and a woman, holding hands and looking at each other with the kind of love that transcended time itself. The story of Yates and Hannah Oakes became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, to choosing love over fear, to building a life based on mutual respect and partnership. It reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most significant moments in life came from the simplest acts, that covering a sleeping stranger with a blanket could be the beginning of everything beautiful. Their great-granddaughter eventually wrote the story down, publishing it as a small book that was sold in Lead and the surrounding towns. People read it and were moved by the simplicity and sincerity of the love story, by the way two people who should never have met had found each other against all odds. The book inspired others to look for ways to show kindness to strangers, to take chances on love even when it seemed impractical, to believe that fairy tales could happen in real life if you were brave enough to let them. The ranch continued to thrive, still breeding the finest horses in South Dakota, and visitors often asked to see the stable where Hannah had slept that fateful night. It had been maintained carefully over the years, kept as close to the original as possible, and standing inside it, people could almost feel the echo of that moment when Yates had made the choice that changed two lives forever. In the small church in Lead where Yates and Hannah had been married, a plaque was installed commemorating their love story. It reads simply, Yates Oakes and Hannah Jennings Oakes, married December 1881, a love story that began with kindness and lasted a lifetime. Couples getting married in that same church would touch the plaque for luck, hoping their love would be as strong and enduring. The legacy of Yates and Hannah was not just in the family they created or the ranch they built, but in the reminder that love often came when you least expected it, that it could grow from the smallest seed of compassion into something vast and unshakable. Their story proved that choosing to be kind, to see the humanity in a stranger, to offer help without expecting anything in return, could lead to rewards beyond imagination. As decades passed and the world changed around them, the story of the cowboy and the woman in the stable remained constant, a beacon of hope and love in uncertain times. It reminded people that no matter how desperate circumstances seemed, no matter how alone they felt, a single act of kindness from a stranger could change everything. It taught that love was not always dramatic or sudden, but could grow naturally from respect and friendship and shared experiences. The descendants of Yates and Hannah carried their story with pride, understanding that they were the product of a love that had been rare and special. They tried to live by the example their ancestors had set, to be kind to strangers, to choose love over convenience, to build relationships based on equality and mutual support. The values that Yates and Hannah had embodied lived on through generations, becoming part of the family's identity. On the 100th anniversary of their meeting, the family held a commemoration at the ranch. Hundreds of people came, descendants of Yates and Hannah from all over the country, along with people from Lead who remembered the story and wanted to honor it. They gathered in the stable at dawn, recreating that moment when Yates had found Hannah sleeping. Someone had brought a replica of the old wool blanket, and they draped it over a young woman who posed as Hannah while a young man posed as Yates, covering her gently. There was not a dry eye in the stable as people watched the simple reenactment, understanding that they were witnessing the beginning of something beautiful. After the ceremony, everyone walked to the graves on the hill, placing flowers and saying prayers, thanking Yates and Hannah for the legacy of love they had left behind. The story continued to be told, passed down through families, shared with children and grandchildren. It became more than just the story of two people falling in love. It became a parable about the power of kindness, about seeing past surface circumstances to the person beneath, about building a life based on love rather than convenience or social expectation. It showed that the best love stories were not about grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but about daily choices to be kind, to listen, to support, to stand together against whatever came. In the stable on the ranch, now over a century and a half old but lovingly maintained, a sign told the story for visitors who came to see where it all began. People stood in that corner where Hannah had slept, trying to imagine being so desperate and exhausted that you would rest in a stranger's stable, and then trying to imagine being the kind of person who would respond with kindness rather than anger. They looked at the stall where Yates kept his horses and imagined him walking quietly to his house to fetch a blanket, making the choice that would define the rest of his life. The story of Yates and Hannah Oakes lived on, immortal in the way that true love stories are, teaching every generation that heard it that love could come from the most unexpected places, that kindness was never wasted, and that sometimes the smallest gesture, a blanket given freely to a sleeping stranger, could be the beginning of everything beautiful. Their love had transcended time, becoming legend, but at its heart it remained simple and true. Two people who found each other when they both needed it most, who chose each other every day, and who built a life together based on respect, partnership, and enduring love. The blanket itself, now ancient and fragile, was displayed in a climate-controlled case in the family home, a sacred relic of the beginning. When direct descendants married, they were allowed to have it present at their wedding, though they could no longer drape it over anyone for fear it would disintegrate. But just having it there, a physical connection to that dawn morning in November 1881, made the ceremony feel blessed, connected to a love that had proved stronger than time. And so the story ended where it began, in a stable at dawn, with an act of simple kindness that had rippled out across generations, proving that love was not just an emotion but a choice, made over and over again, day after day, year after year. Yates choosing to cover Hannah with a blanket before she woke, Hannah choosing to trust him despite her fear. Both of them choosing each other, choosing to build a life together, choosing love even when it was difficult or scary or uncertain. That was the real lesson of their story, the gift they had given to all who came after them. Love was a choice and kindness was a choice, and those choices mattered more than anything else. They could change lives, build families, create legacies that lasted centuries. All from a cowboy finding a woman asleep in his stable at dawn and fetching a blanket before she could wake. That one simple act of compassion that had started everything.